When in doubt, he's so narcissistic, he's so awful, and I'm sure there are some of them that are correct. My issue with that is when I was a licensed therapist, there was a very specific criteria and definitions for what a narcissist is. This is Bob Grant from Relationship Headquarters, and today we're going to talk about 3 signs he's a narcissist. When I came up with this, I did this in our newsletter to begin with and got a lot of response. So I figured maybe it'd be fun to talk about this. And to me, what I've found in the last few years, it seems like so many people, especially women, seem to want to identify, especially an ex-boyfriend or ex-husband, as he's a narcissist. When in doubt, he's so narcissistic, he's so awful, and I'm sure there are some of them that are correct. My issue with that is when I was a licensed therapist, there was a very specific criteria and definitions for what a narcissist is. And so, just calling someone a narcissist, it's not identical, but it's similar to calling someone an alcoholic. Well, to be an alcoholic, you have to meet certain criteria clinically to be called one. And so what I want to do with this is let's dial down about what this really means. And then, if you're involved with this or if you have a pattern with this as far as what to do. And there are many different clinical measurements as to what a narcissist is. And let's do a qualifier. This is not, if you're working with a clinician and your relationship with someone, don't just take what I'm saying as like, well, Bob said that you're the person you work with is going to have a lot more information about you than I do. So this is in general, okay, this is just a guideline, okay? And the other thing is, please don't go to someone and just, you're a narcissist over here because this Bob Grant guy, don't do that, please. This is just for your sake more than anything else to start looking and considering, and it may be the starting point of a journey for you, hopefully. That's all my qualifiers there. So these are the things that I found and that at least make me curious or wondering. Remember, everyone has some narcissism. Everyone has some degree. So if we're looking for like altruistic, I want someone with no narcissism, doesn't exist. Children are born with narcissism. They don't have an ego in place when they're little. So it's all me, great mood, and then I'm in an awful mood, depending on if I'm fed or if I pooped in my pants. And then hopefully the idea is we grow up and our ego develops and we learn to balance those two extremes. And the other thing is sometimes narcissism is healthy. What can I mean by that? Well, if one of the characteristics of narcissism, is an inflated sense of ego, that's what a lot of people associate it with, like, hyper confident. If I'm a developer, a real estate developer, it's probably a good thing that I've got some narcissism, because I have to believe and borrow money and convince people that don't necessarily see my vision. I've got to believe in something that doesn't exist yet. The worst thing for me is to be full of doubts and not really sure. One, I'm going to do an awful job of selling myself to the bank to borrow the money. The other is, when times get tough, I'm going to be like, oh, this isn't working out. I'm going to probably quit early. So narcissism is not always a bad thing to have all the time. What folks refer to a lot of times with narcissism is where it's destructive qualities where someone falls back on and they use them as a way of avoiding responsibility. Number one is lack of empathy. This is probably the biggest one I see, and you may have noticed this with others. Empathy is not simply feeling sorry for someone when they're having a bad day. That's relatability. If I was screamed at by my parents growing up and I see someone else being screamed at by their parents, I probably wouldn't like that even if I didn't. But if I have that, I can relate to that and I feel a special sense of bonding with that person. Oh, I know what that was like. That's awful. I'm reminded of the same feelings I had growing up when I see that it's someone else. Relating to someone, while it may be a kind gesture, it's not the same as empathy. Empathy is where we make a conscious effort to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. Empathy requires work. Empathy is not natural. Let me emphasize that. Being empathetic is not a natural quality. Empathy is something we choose to do. And when it's most difficult is with someone we don't relate to well. So here in the United States, in our political state, which has probably been this way for a lot longer, we won't admit, is that it's difficult for one, extreme or the other, conservative, progressive, Republican, Democrat. It's hard to be empathetic with the other side because, one side totally disagrees with the other. And the other, well, not totally, but just in a lot of big issues they do. Empathy is making a point to see if you can understand their point of view, which doesn't mean you agree with it. Because the fear is that if I say I understand it, you're going to mistake that as, oh, good, you agree with it. And then all of a sudden, I don't want to get taken advantage of. Empathy takes effort. Empathy requires a very well-developed ego. So someone with lack of empathy, the ego between your superego and your id tends to be like Swiss cheese. They don't do well with that. All of us, this gets back to everyone has some narcissism. If we're honest, all of us at times feel like we deserve special treatment. Ladies, let's just admit this. You like being treated like you're special. You like it when your man loves you. Yes, I know it's not the same thing. What's wrong with that? I'm not saying anything's wrong with it. All I'm doing is just doing a little carve out here and pointing out that, I do like that. But that's a different thing than deserving. One of the things with a narcissistic man is he feels entitled. And with deserving, if I add something to that, it's I deserve special treatment regardless of how I act, regardless of whether I nurture my relationship, regardless of whether I'm having a good day or a bad day. I deserve to be treated because of all these wonderful things I've done, or because I'm such a great guy, or because I paid for dinner. Therefore, I deserve you to have sex with. That's a narcissistic characteristic. And it's all primarily about them, obviously. And again, the emphasis with this one is deserving. Third one is, and you've seen this, is talking about themselves incessantly. It's not so much that it's doing a word count, like anything over 10,000 words is narcissistic. Anything less is not. It's not that. But the reason we're talking incessantly about themselves is so that the focus stays on them. So the story goes on and on. It never ends. Talking long sentences oftentimes. And I'm thinking of one person and he's telling the story and it's long. It's so long. It's over, I forgot where the place was. He's going into details about it and going into details. And see, one thing about their stories is they are highly entertained by their story. You're just along for the ride. In most storytelling, a good storyteller is about the person listening. If I'm a good storyteller, perhaps I'm doing the hero's journey, the most popular one, but I'm taking you along for the ride so that you feel like the hero. I mean, movie scripts that are written well, the audience member feels like they're the hero. They experience it through the hero or heroine's eyes. And they leave the movie, we're like, oh, I just overaccomplished. A lot of adversity. Oh, I accomplished something fantastic. But with them, they're the hero in their own story. And they want to control that conversation. One of the things, some of you have heard this before, is early on when I'm talking with a client, and most of my clients are women, when I'm talking with them and they'll say something, I'll interrupt them on purpose. Not for the sake of just being interrupting, but they have a point or something they've made and I'll interrupt. And one is I want to make the point, but the other is I want to see how well they deal with me interrupting. This is something for you to keep an eye on. Because women that will not, or men will not let you interrupt them, that's a very rigid personality. Again, no one likes being interrupted per se. And I'm not saying you should just welcome this, it's fun. But see, the lack of that rigidity indicates being fragile. And if I point this out to someone, they're fragile. I'm not fragile. I don't like being interrupted. And you can hear like a door slamming. And ladies, that'll come up in your relationship. That's why I want you to pay attention to these things, is that's not something that just, oh, he's just like this. Well, he is like this. But there's more to it than that. It's not just this one area. Because I've found that women that will let me interrupt them get much better results because they're open to new ideas. Those that will not let you interrupt them are not open to new ideas, and the same with men. So someone that will not let you interrupt them has a very closed or rigid mindset. And that's okay if you like the way they think totally. If you don't need to influence or want to, that's fine. Rarely is there going to be a relationship with a lot of intimacy where you're not going to want to have some influence. But real intimacy and closeness is not simply finding the perfect person. It's meeting and finding someone that's a good fit, which just means it's close, and there's a willingness for them to allow you to influence them. Because ladies, if you're watching this and you can't influence a man, you're not going to feel as special in his life. You influencing him is how women feel special. It's the reasons for why Beauty and the Beast is such a popular movie. Beauty tames the beast. He allows her to tame him. And so him not letting you influence him is going to lead to resentment. There's another podcast on that or a video. So those are three things. And if you're dealing with someone like this, let's focus on these aspects. Well, before we do that, let's do an overview. You don't have to get rid of him if he's got these tendencies. And let's also don't label him because it kind of doesn't matter if he is. Because when you say someone's narcissistic, what I want to get you away from is my man so narcissistic? Well, if he was that narcissistic, you wouldn't have started dating him to begin with, most likely, or you knew it going in. So stop acting so surprised. You knew this going in. If he's so obviously narcissistic, don't act like this is some big revelation. You know this within a date or two. I couldn't tell. I'm going to push you a little bit. You couldn't tell because you didn't want to see it, or you couldn't tell because you didn't want to see it. Either one isn't good on your part. Most likely, it's not as bad as you feel right now. If you're labeling him this, you probably got some hurt feelings. He might have mistreated you, but you contributed to some degree by tolerating. I'm not saying you deserve it. I'm not even blaming you. No one deserves to be treated poorly. I'm not saying that. But we want to take as much ownership as we can. Otherwise, we can't change stuff. So if you are involved with him, let's, number one, give up on him changing drastically. He's not gonna go from having narcissistic tendencies to being someone with a lot of empathy. That's too far of a gap. And again, he can do it at times. He may be very empathetic at times. He may be very kind at times. Okay, so that's normal. All of us have good days and bad days. But as far as, if I just love him enough, have enough sex with him, I'm enough stuff, no. We don't change anyone's personality. You can reward him if he's making efforts. Someone's trying to quit drinking and they're going to meetings and they're abstaining from alcohol. Absolutely reward that. Tell him how proud you are of it. But don't think there's something you're going to do that's going to make him stop drinking or make him give up narcissism. Number two, be firm in your boundaries. Okay, firm does not mean harsh. Firm does not mean loud. Firm does not mean intense. Firm means consistent. And once it feels, whatever your measure is, that he's walking on you, if he's interrupting you all the time, if he's calling you a liar, whatever he's doing, it's you point out what he's doing and tell him what the consequence is. And that's the warning shot. If you keep yelling, I'm going to leave the room. If you lie to me again, we're done. Now, if I'm talking with a client, if you're a client, I don't have a sheet to give someone like, do this if he does that, because every situation is a little different. I can make up one. My concern with giving someone a sheet is they're like, hey, my situation doesn't fit in here. Exactly. Or they may try something off a sheet and it blows up, and it's because your situation, your circumstance, it's going to be a little different for everyone. So that's why I like to try to customize it with someone, and let's bounce some ideas. So if we're talking about what boundaries to set and when to set them, it's customized for your situation. The third one is to decide what you can and cannot accept. And the best way I know to do this is asking yourself when he does something, is it worth it enforcing it all the way? All the way means I would leave. All the way may mean I'll call the police, depending on what it is. Is it worth it? Most things are not worth it. And sometimes enforcing all the way means leaving the room. But what I mean with this is that you set a boundary and he steps over it. You set another boundary, he steps over that. And they kind of gradually increase as far as the intensity. And in the course of doing that, once you've done that, now all of a sudden the third boundary is, okay, it keeps escalating. So it's either leave or just forget it. Well, if we're not willing to enforce it all the way, let's don't start at the beginning. It doesn't mean you have to jump toward the third one. It doesn't mean that he does something, now you threaten to leave. Once you start setting boundaries, remember you have to follow through all the way. Otherwise, let's don't enforce it to begin with. Let's just don't enforce anything. That's the case. So decide ahead of time. And if you don't know how to do this, visit us at relationshipheadquarters.com. We have some articles there that know more about this. If you want me to help you individually, be happy to do this. I do this with women all the time. And because what we want to do is get rid of guessing. What I tell women a lot of times is you don't have to do this alone. You can. You don't have to figure this out by yourself. Is that whether it's one of our programs, the Woman Minute Door is the main one that we emphasize, and it's about how women put their heart first. Because when you understand how to put your heart first, it becomes harder for a man to shame you. It becomes almost impossible for him to manipulative with you. He can try, but the example I say a lot of times, I say, imagine if a man called you a giraffe. You don't know. First, that's weird, but you don't know if he's teasing. Is he serious? But see, you don't relate to it. It's not enough that you obviously know you're not a giraffe. But see, it's so far from your reality, it doesn't bother you as much as it's odd. And depending on your mood, you might find it funny or you may be quizzical about it. Imagine if that same thing happened if a man called you mean, selfish, or whatever your button is. Imagine if you didn't have a button anymore. Because even if a man did it, it wouldn't affect you. I've seen women do this. We see it all the time. That's what makes it safe for you to influence a man and also to draw a man closer. So be sure to visit us at relationshipheadquarters.com. We have lots of goodies for you. If you have a question about this, leave it down below in the question area. Subscribe and be sure and click the like button. And if you're tired of, remember, accepting crumbs, think in terms of if you deal with someone narcissistic. We gave you 3 guidelines, and with those guidelines, the goal behind those is not to label him narcissistic, but to pay attention. And that if this is a relationship I want to be a part of, this is what's going to be required. Thanks for joining us again, and we'll see you next time.